is Avijit Chatterjee. Welcome to our weekly session of Chartsarefun. This is for the week of March 30th, recording this in the afternoon of April 5th. Our service here has got a blog site called chartsarefun.substack.com. Appreciate you subscribing to it with your email. And when these blogs come out in the morning, they'll be emailed right out to you. And it's free of charge. The YouTube site is also Charts Are Fun. We believe that there are tremendous insights in the charts, and we want to make them fun, want to make them valuable to you so that you can help make your investment decisions using these charts. We do not provide any investment advice. We are not registered investment advisors, so please do take these insights as learning lessons, as guides or as tools that you could use in your trading and investment decisions. Today, we will focus on crypto. We will talk about Bitcoin, and in particular, Warren Buffett's very well-known comment that when there's extreme fear in the market, consider taking the opposite stance from a contrarian view and start looking to take positive decisions in terms of making buying decisions on such investment opportunities. So the first chart that we share here is a monthly chart of Bitcoin to gold. That ratio, we know that there's been tremendous bullish sentiment in gold. The perma bulls on the gold are looking for continued climb in gold all the way towards 6,000 or even higher. But if you look at the ratio of Bitcoin to gold, it's tracing back exactly what it did in 2021 through 22. In that span, that ratio of the Bitcoin to gold fell from 38 down to 8. And the number of months that it took, each candle here, this is a monthly chart, is a month of trading. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So a span of 13 months, it pulled from 38 to 8. In the most recent a pullback in Bitcoin, or call it the cyclical bear market in Bitcoin, we see that the ratio fell from a higher ratio at 41. So it was 38 back in 2021. Here it was 41 to a ratio closer towards 11.38 is where it fell to. If you draw the trend lines, we can draw the trend line joining the peaks, trend line joining the bottoms. They are parallel to each other. And so it is tested and rebounded off that bottom end of the trend line very recently. And that's in the month of February. And since then, the last couple of months into March and April, it's coasting higher. So if you count the number of months that it took from this drop from 41 to 11, you're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So slightly higher number of months, but it is exactly bounced off that rising trend line, parallel to the top trend line joining the peaks. So that in some way is a consideration that perhaps this ratio of Bitcoin to gold could have bottomed and Bitcoin could be ready to outperform gold. So while there is extreme bullishness in gold, it might actually be a good idea to diversify out of gold, consider buying cryptos instead. And as gold underperforms, cryptos may have a possibility to outshine gold in the next several months, like what we saw in the 2022 into 2024. We can see a significant jump in the relative performance of Bitcoin to gold. Now, looking at the sentiment of crypto, there is a Crypto Fear and Greed Index that is published by alternative.me. And in here, we can see that over the last almost 2 months from early February, this has been hugging 20 and lower, which is extreme fear is usually 24 and lower. And we can see that it has been hugging that level of 20 and lower for pretty much last couple of months, for most of February into March and even into early April. Except in the mid-March, it had briefly climbed up towards a level at 28, but then quickly came back down. And we can see when you have extreme fear over a span of 2 months, that is also a consideration that right now investors are shunning cryptos. They are just worried that this is going to have a lot more downside. So then the analysis of looking at the chart, short-term and long-term, tells us some ideas of where do we think this Bitcoin chart it could be headed. So this is a daily chart of Bitcoin. We're showing you an interesting pattern that whenever the correlation of VIX to Bitcoin becomes positive, From that point onward, as the correlation is usually negative, but when it turns positive and then starts falling, the correlation from positive starts going down towards negative, Bitcoin's prices start falling. So here, right when it peaked out at 126 towards early October, we can see that the correlation had turned positive. And from there, from 126, as it fell to a low of 80,600, correlation turned back towards fully negative, towards the minus 0.75. It took few, weeks after that to base and then started climbing again as Bitcoin recovered from 80,000 to 97. So these dotted lines that you see in purple are the periods when the peak happened, kind of a cyclical peak, and then the pullback from there. And as those pullbacks came, the corresponding correlation of VIX to Bitcoin started going from positive to negative. So here it went positive to negative, here it went positive to negative, and more recently, when we peaked at 76,000 around that early March, from there, as Bitcoin pulled back from 76 to retest 65, we can see that the correlation turned negative again. But very recently, into early April, we can start seeing the correlation begin to start climbing. Another key factor to look at is, as this is happening, where is the accumulation distribution? That's called the AD line. Accumulation distribution was pretty strong till the point when Bitcoin peaked at 127, 126,000, and then it started falling as distribution happened. Then it plateaued out, started to climb a little bit into December, came back, retested it, till the point when we got that 60,000 capitulation low. Accumulation was at its worst, as in when distribution kind of peaked out. From there, AD is beginning to climb. It has not yet been able to reclaim the levels that we saw from like September to October last year, but it is beginning to base. And what we would look at as a sign is if this correlation starts becoming positive again, if we start seeing Bitcoin price-wise start moving higher, accumulation to start climbing, and most importantly, if you look at the MACD so far has broken down to lower lows at each of the lows. At 80,600, MACD had turned towards minus, say, 6 or so. The more recent low at 60,000, MACD had turned as low as minus 8. So a lower low in MACD. However, now MACD is beginning to make a turn higher, and it's at minus 1.2, significantly above the previous MACDs that we've seen at minus 6 and minus 8. So this, in terms of MACD, if it is able to reclaim above the zero line and start climbing, if it starts climbing to higher levels than what we saw at these last couple of peaks at 76 and 97,000, and even at that 126, if it's able to climb above 2 towards 3, 4, and higher in MACD, that would be a bullish reversal into Bitcoin. Now, where would the near-term measurement on this bullish reversal be? From 60,000 to 76, call it an extended cup, and then the handle forming a shallow pullback. So 60 to 76 is 16,000. At 16,000 to 76, that takes us to 92,000. That's a little higher than where we are on the 200 period moving average at 89,000, but 90,500 to 90,300, that 92, and then we've seen some 93,000 here. So that move from 90 to 92,000 would be that cup and handle move, is what we are expecting Bitcoin to do over the next several weeks. Now, if you take a longer term view on this Bitcoin, and in this particular case, look at the monthly chart of Bitcoin, we can see that it has also recently rebounded off the rising trend line joining the lows, as we have a parallel rising trend line joining the highs. So 69,000 to 126 joined that trend line, parallel trend line to that joining the lows. That's where it bounced. So this is also a beautiful channel. It shows a nice rebound having met its target, is what we think Bitcoin has done. There are many bears out there, as we see the extreme fear with, the very recent crypto fear value has been sitting right now over here at 12, right? It's extreme fear continued. And there are many who are looking for Bitcoin to actually break 60 and go all the way towards even as low as the 20,000s, 28, 24,000 is many that are looking for. But maybe from a contrarian perspective, with the extreme fear, with what we see here, a repetition of what happened in the 2021 into 2022, this could be a perfect time to be buying crypto. Not saying go all in. Maybe you could kind of dollar cost average and start buying more if it does tank below this trend line. From our perspective, looking at the pattern on the chart, looking at some of the contrarian signs of the extreme fear, we think this is likely a low is put in place at 60,000, and there's a very good chance that Bitcoin should start climbing back. If it is able to climb back, then expect a higher high above 124, much higher, because if you take this is looking at the chart with like arithmetic scale, but if you put a logarithmic scale, the climbing could go all the way up to 400,000 to test the top trend line. So if you change this and you just convert this to a log scale, this whole pattern changes and you can join these peaks and it goes all the way up to 400,000 from where this bounce could take us to. That's for us to look into. Ethereum, which is the other major crypto, the rest are altcoins, but Bitcoin and Ethereum are the two biggest cryptos in terms of the investor demand. That also shows a very similar kind of a pullback in terms of what we saw in 2021 into 2022. From that 48.65 level to 803, 883, that was over a span of every candle here is a month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Over 8 months, it pulled back from 48.65 to 883. A similar kind of sharp pullback happened in Ethereum last year into this year, from a slightly higher high from 48.65 to 49.55. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a span of 1 month less. So this was 8 months. This is 7 months. It printed its low at 1746. Right now, it's holding above 2000. We can see that the MACD histogram is oversold. We can see RSI, when we are in an overall bullish trend, RSI never goes as deep towards 30. It hovers around the low 40s, 42, 43 level, and then from there it could reclaim a climb. So that's what we expect Ethereum to do. And technically, if you look at an 883 to a 49.55, you're talking about $4,100 is the depth of this cup. So if this has a cup and handle breakout, that 4,100 added to 49 is 9,000 is where we think Ethereum could go. So that's the target of where Ethereum, if it once begins its climb, could go. Now let's look at some of the core, while you can directly invest in cryptos, whether it's Bitcoin and Ethereum, let's look at one of the proxies to Bitcoin from a leverage play, and also it's one of the first companies that converted. It's a software BI company, MicroStrategy. They renamed to Strategy. Michael Saylor is the founder of that company. He was one of the first guys who kind of had a firm belief that Bitcoin is scarce in supply, going to be the digital monetary instrument of the world. And he, because of the scarcity in supply, because of its fundamental value where he sees he's replaced many of the fiat currencies and people investing onto crypto, as Bitcoin in particular, as the preferred transactional instrument, he took a lot of the cash in MicroStrategy's treasury and bought Bitcoins. And he has, of course, suffered a lot. His stock from 457 at the peak in July, it has tanked all the way towards 104. So that was a very big tank. However, recently we can see positive divergence. RSI printing higher lows. At the point when it was 155, RSI was a lot more oversold. When it hit 104, it was not as oversold as it was in November. And now RSI, as we can see, it's close to that 104. It's at 117 recently in the late March it tested, but it's holding at a higher low in RSI. So that's positive divergence. Very clear positive divergence in MACD. We can see that MACD was a lot lower in November, much higher in February, and now it's much higher than that. So that positive divergence in MACD, in RSI, and a basing formation here from 104 to 152 is 48 points. At 48 to 152, 200 is 198. We can see here is the previous resistance where we think MicroStrategy or strategy MSTR could be climbing to. So that's the target on MSTR in the next several weeks to months is where we see it headed. Circle, which is the largest issuer of stablecoin, it's a regulated issuer of stablecoin, is forming a beautiful cup and handle. You can see the cup here from 147 as the left rim of the cup, tested a bottom of the cup at 49.90, went up to 136 as the right brim of the cup. From there, a shallow pullback. If this breaks higher from 49 or 50 to 136 is 86 points. 86 points added to 136. We're talking about close to 220 to 223 is where we think this could go in terms of its cup and handle breakout. So that's above that 189 that we saw in early August. 215 was right here in the July timeframe, below the 262, but something in the 220 to 225 is where we think Circle could go once this cup and handle breakout. And we think this is a shallow pullback. We can see it holding its rising 50 period moving average. We can see RSI holding at 42, which is a bullish sign, not breaking down. We can see MACD's begun to curve higher from an oversold level. Histogram is on the negative side, started now curving higher. So the MACD and also from a signal line testing the zero and then kind of curving higher. So MACD doing a zero line test and then RSI holding at 42 and then starting a climb. This kind of a shallow handle. That breakout about 136 takes us to 222, 223 is where we think Circle is headed. Coinbase, which is the largest crypto exchange, is also potentially forming a cup and handle. The handle is slightly deeper than a typical shallow handle. However, from 139 to 213, it tested twice. It broke down to 158. If it can reclaim 179 and start climbing, that 158 to 179 is $21. So that 21 takes us to 200. So that 200, but if it breaks 213 from a 139, that's roughly, you're talking about 74. So 74 added to 213, you're talking about anywhere from 287 or so is where we think, which is likely higher than the 200 period moving average 280. 287 is where we think this could go once it breaks above 213. So that's Coinbase. Now the two biggest crypto miners, in this case Bitcoin miners, Mara, they had mined 8,800 Bitcoins last year. And the second largest is Riot that mined less than that at about 5,600 or so coins last year. Mara, if you look at its formation, it had, of course, dropped a lot from 23 down to $6. However, look at its beautiful positive divergence. As it is forming out a low or a bottom, MACD we can see is at a higher low. We can see RSI is at a higher low. And all of these indicate that Mara from a 6.66 to a 10.03, you're talking about roughly 3.37 or so, kind of the depth of the cup. So 3.37 added to a 10.03 takes us to 13.4, which is close to its 200 period moving average at 13.63. So 13.4 we can see here at the June low as well. So that's where we think Mara is headed near term. We expect a bullish play in Mara. We can see a nice good move on last Friday, on last Thursday. Friday was market close for Good Friday, but on last Thursday, it climbed 8.33% on reasonably good volume at 50,000 shares is what it did. So nice, good move. That breakout above 10 can take it to 13.4 is where we think Mara is headed. Riot, which actually was below Mara in market cap, but because they diversified from cryptos into AI as using a lot of the infrastructure, the GPUs that they have for mining cryptos, they started converting it to use it for AI data center growth. Actually also shows a nice base forming, lower lows from 1204 to 1181 to 1150. But look at RSI, not at a lower low. RSI is at a higher low. Look at MACD. MACD from when it tested 1204 to when it tested 1105 is at a higher low from that level. So that positive divergence, if it is able to break from 12 to 19, 7.3 added to 19, they're talking about 26.8 or so, which is above the 23.9 high that it saw in October peak of crypto of Bitcoin. So Riot to us is forming a nice base here between 12 and 19. If it is able to break out higher and gather momentum, we expect it to go back, retest the 23.9, ideally go to 26 is where we think Riot could be headed. So with that, just to sum it up, we feel that looking at the Bitcoin to the gold ratio, we are ideally setting up for Bitcoin to outperform gold. It has beautifully tested the bottom of the trend line. So as the ratio climbs, Bitcoin expected to outperform gold. Crypto fear is at an extreme fear below the 20 level for several weeks now, from early February all the way to recently, except an exception around mid-March. It had slightly gone above to 28, but has since then come down and hovering in that 10 to 20 level. So extreme fear for 2 months on cryptos. Bitcoin from a correlation to its VIX. Every time it goes from positive to negative correlation on the VIX, it starts declining, which is what it did most recently from mid-March. As the correlation went negative, Bitcoin started declining. However, the correlation early signs is showing to start turning higher towards positive. So as that correlation to VIX turns positive, we can expect Bitcoin to start having upward move. From 60 to 76 is 16,000, added to 76, 92 is where we think the near-term target on Bitcoin is. Looking at its longer-term chart, we can just look at its using the arithmetic scale. It tested nicely the bottom end of the trend line and rebounded off it. We think this should hold. While bears are looking for Bitcoin to break 60 and go to the 20s, we think this is going to hold and climb up to higher highs is where we think. RSI is beautifully at 43, not breaking down to 30 like it never has. Since the history of Bitcoin, RSI never goes that low. It tests in the low 40s and starts climbing back higher. Testing in the low 40s, started climbing back higher. Testing in the low 40s. We expect it to succeed. Given the extreme bearishness, from a contrarian perspective, we expect this to have bottomed at 60 already and climb to higher highs. Ethereum, beautiful pullback like we saw from 2021 into 22, similar time period. In terms of the number of months that it took to fall from the peak to the bottom, from an 883 to 49.55, you're talking about roughly $4,100 added to 49. 9,000 is where if this breakout happens in Ethereum. So it's decent upside from 2,000 to 9,000 is where, talking about 4.5 times of climb in Ethereum once it breaks above 4,900. MicroStrategy from a Bitcoin treasury play is basing for 104 to 52 is 48, added to 152 is 200 is where we think its target is once it breaks 152. Circle, the largest stablecoin issuer, has got a beautiful cup and handle from 49 to 136. That's roughly, we're talking about 86 added to 136. 222 to 223 is where we think Circle would be headed from its cup and handle breakout. Coinbase is kind of 213 to 139. That's roughly, we are talking about 74 or so added to the 213. We are talking about 287 is where we think the Coinbase upside target is once it breaks 213. Mara is right now a nice pattern of basing with higher lows in RSI, positive divergence RSI and MACD. Break above 10 from 6.66 low takes us towards 13.4, which is what we've seen in the June low. And it's slightly below the 200 period moving average. We think that's where it's headed. Had a nice bullish move on Thursday, 8.3% move with good volume. So we think Mara is looking good in terms of the next several weeks. RIOT also forming a nice positive divergence as it tested a lower low from 12 to 11.8 to 11.5. We can see RSI clearly at a higher low. We can see MACD at a higher low. All that positive divergence indicates if it is able to break 19 from a 12 to 19, you're talking about $7 or so, added to 19, headed to 26, 27 is where we think RIOT could be headed, which is above its early October peak at $23.9, $24. With that, good luck investing. We'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening.
We are not registered investment advisors and encourage our users to consult with their financial advisors before making investment and trading decisions. Nothing contained in our content constitutes a solicitation, recommendation, endorsement, or offer by us at Chartsarefun or any third-party service provider to buy or sell any securities or other financial instruments in this or in any other jurisdiction in which such solicitation or offer would be unlawful under the securities laws of such jurisdiction.